started then. Yeah, really excited to give an update, excuse me, on our human rights benchmark project and share some initial results with everyone. So if you've been to any of the previous talks on this project, the first bit is a little recap of what the human rights benchmark project is. So I apologize for that, but I wanted to include the intro in case there's people who haven't been to the previous talks as well. Okay, so first, what is a benchmark? Why are we building a benchmark? So a benchmark is the kind of gold standard for in AI research for evaluating AI systems, and particularly measuring measuring a specific aspect of AI model performance. So some examples of existing benchmarks are everything from like truthful question answering to social bias in LLMs. There are benchmarks for like reasoning in LLMs and all different kinds of topics. And they're a really essential component of the AI research landscape. And you can benchmark any type of AI system. Here we're focusing on LLMs, and LLM benchmarks consist of basically a taxonomy that explains what you're doing with the benchmark and what the tasks you're trying to accomplish are, and then a set of prompts that are fed to the LLM, and the LLM is evaluated on their response to on the model response to those prompts, as well as an evaluation metric that tells you how you score those outputs and responses. And what's really important about benchmarks is that they allow researchers and organizations to compare apples to apples the performance of different models, the capacity of different models to exhibit different behaviors and do different kinds of tasks. So why did we want to build the human rights benchmark in particular? So as we're probably all aware, AI models are increasingly used in many high stakes processes that directly impact human rights, things like doing job recruitment, deciding access to housing, healthcare, education, etc., in addition to many daily work tasks that indirectly impact human rights. So it's really essential that AI models don't contribute to increased human rights violations, and we hope that AI actually promotes the expansion of human rights. And there's no benchmark that focuses on this topic at all. So existing AI benchmarks focus on things like model performance on different subjects, cognitive tasks like truthful question answering or logical reasoning, or on narrow ethics topics like social bias. So there's no benchmark that even comes close to measuring anything about human rights. So this is a really exciting project that we've started this year, and it's really key that we have collaboration between technical AI researchers like myself and human rights stakeholders to develop this new first of its kind data set. And just a bit about the impact. So we are working on our first publication now to share this benchmark in an AI research venue to encourage its adoption by researchers and developers as a standard for AI evaluation. And then, of course, we'll also be sharing the benchmark with human rights stakeholders who can use it to inform what LLMs they choose to work with. Okay, so getting into how we designed the benchmark. So a lot of the work of building a good and useful benchmark is in characterizing the space that we want to measure. So I like to kind of think about benchmarks as requiring these four things. So you want your benchmark to be true to the type of work people actually do. This is a huge problem called construct validity, where a lot of benchmarks are designed so that they're easy to score or easy to evaluate LLMs with, but they're not actually close to the way people use LLMs in practice. But similarly, you need on the other hand, you also need your benchmark to be probing a task that can be measured. So often this means that you can't just do open-ended text generation with an LLM because that's hard to score. It's hard to put a metric on, how well the LLM is doing. And then the third component is that you need to make sure that your benchmark is true to the domain in which you're applying it. So here I say the axes of variation within the domain. So for us, for example, if the bias benchmark, social bias benchmark in LLMs, they don't want to just look at gender bias, right? And then say they have a benchmark for bias because there's many different kinds of bias that an LLM might exhibit. Sorry. And then the last component is building appropriate evaluation metrics. And I'll come back to that at the end of the talk as a challenge point in this work. So mapping those considerations onto our specific human rights benchmark. So first, kind of when we were deciding the scope of this benchmark to start off with, we had a lot of conversations with different human rights experts on what kind of work they actually do and how they use LLMs. And we decided to focus on this first type of activity that human rights workers do, which is monitoring and reporting. Then to touch on cover this axis of variation within the domain, again through conversations with a lot of different human rights experts, as well as reading different textbooks and materials. We put together a taxonomy that describes different ways that human rights scenarios that are monitored and reported on might vary. So we kind of have two groups of categories in our taxonomy. So we have analytic categories drawn directly from international human rights law, looking at the nature of obligation violated. So whether the state is violating an obligation to respect, protect, or fulfill, and then the type of failure, if there is a failure present in a particular scenario, what type of failure that is. And then we have descriptive categories. So these are mainly the actors involved. So who is a player in the story, who's taking an action that may violate human rights, whether it's a state alone or a state involving NGO, a company, an IGO, or an individual, and then different groups of rights holders that might be affected. And then we have an additional category that's not listed on here, which is complex scenarios. So we want to make sure that the situations we're describing in our benchmark, cover a full range of human rights issues. So we have a specific category for things like human rights violations that involve AI, so leveraging an AI system to have some kind of human rights impact, as well as conflict zones, which tend to be more complex, and scenarios involving climate change. And we've developed a systematic scientific strategy for building the actual benchmark prompts. This is a 3-step approach that starts that I'll describe here. So first, we generate realistic scenarios that capture different components of the taxonomy. These scenarios are informed by general comments on the Human Rights Declaration, human rights textbooks, and other publications, so that they're true to the kind of situations that human rights experts have been seeing on the ground. And some of these scenarios involve modular features that we can adjust when we're evaluating the LLMs, such as location and the kind of groups that are discussed in the scenario, which lets us do an additional kind of counterfactual measurement of discrimination in a human rights context. And so these scenarios are given to the LLMs as context before we actually ask it questions. So to give an example of what one of our scenarios looks like, I have here This is one of our real scenarios from the benchmark. So it describes basically a situation in a fictional state where low-income families have difficulty accessing clean and sufficient water, and then it provides some detail of why that's the case. So there's a few communal standpipes that are often dry or only provide limited water, and the rest of water access is privately owned and very expensive to access. And this high cost of purchasing water adds severe economic strain to already struggling households. The second step of our prompt generation is what we call sub-scenarios. So each of those overall scenarios that I described has a set of specific impacts or actions taken by actors and rights holders. Um, and this narrows the focus of evaluation to a specific context. So first we would feed the LLM this overall scenario and then one specific detail. So I have two examples for the same scenario I just showed. The first example is focused on women and children, and describing how particularly women and children have to walk long distances to additional water sources, exposing them to health risks and imposing a burden on their time and dignity. The second sub scenario I have here focuses on a policy action. So there is a water for all policy in this fictional country, but the country has failed to allocate appropriate resources to fulfill that policy obligation. And then each of these sub-scenarios is turned into a set of 5 prompts that the LLM will be evaluated on using what we call IRAP, which is a modified version of IRAC, which is a methodology for doing legal reasoning. And this IRAC is used in Legal Bench, which is a general legal reasoning benchmark. So IRAP, as we're using here, consists of 4 different question types that we give to the LLM. So the first is issue identification. These are multiple choice questions that ask if one of those obligations or failure modes from the taxonomy that I showed a few slides ago applies. Then we have rule recall, where we give the model a multiple choice list of possible laws and ask if any of them apply to the specific sub-scenario that we're looking at. Then we have rule application, where we give a list of applicable rules and laws that all do apply to the specific scenario, but kind of have varying applicability. And we ask the model to rank them in order of applicability. And then finally, the P question is an open-ended short response question where we ask the model to propose up to 10 remedies, actions that the state could take to rectify the situation happening in the particular sub-scenario. So we first picked one right to focus on to kind of validate the approach that we're using here, and we focused on right to water first. So I'm going to show some actual details about I already showed one of the scenarios and sub-scenarios, but I'll show some specific prompts for right to water so you can see what these look like. So all of the issue identification questions look the same. So it's 2 questions. One first asking about if the state violated any of the following human rights obligations, obligation to respect, protect, or actually, sorry, this is outdated. We changed this based on some feedback from human rights experts. We changed it so it's just the obligation to fulfill rather than splitting it into conduct and result. And then we give the model the option to say no obligation is violated. Then rule recall questions look like this. So we give so this is actually the set of answers for that sub-scenario I showed here in example 1, focusing on women and children specifically. So we give some possible human rights laws that apply to this only one of which actually applies to this particular scenario. So we include things like CEDAW, specifically an article regarding women in rural areas, as well as other laws that don't directly apply to this situation. And we ask the model to select the correct law that applies to the scenario. Then rule application, again, we give a list of laws that all do apply, but kind of apply in sort of like range and applicability. So if this was brought to a human rights trial, you might argue under one law versus the other. Here they're listed in what we think is the correct order of ranking, but when we actually feed this to the model, everything is randomized. So the multiple choice questions as well, each time we run it, the answers will be presented in a different order, which is really important for making sure that your evaluation is actually measuring model performance and not like some artifact of the answers always being in the same order. And then finally, proposed remedies. This is the same text that we use for every sub-scenario. List up to 10 possible actions the state could take to provide remedies in this scenario. And then this is an example of what we consider to be correct answers, again, for that first sub-scenario. So things like providing additional water resources, implementing public health oversight, to make sure the water that is available is free of contamination, allocating budgetary resources, addressing particular issues faced by women and children, and implementing legal frameworks to reduce the cost of private water. And then I just wanted to show a subset of our taxonomy coverage tracker. So we really want to make sure that we're covering all aspects of our taxonomy. So you can see here how we track those different taxonomy components, what type of obligation is violated, what type of failure mode is present, and then who the actors involved are and whether or not there's a complex system like AI. So again, this is just a subset, but we track this to ensure we have full coverage across our data set for right to water. And then a really important component of doing this benchmark building is what we call annotation. So each scenario, sub-scenario, question, and answer is reviewed by at least 3 human rights experts to make sure that the scenarios are realistic and that the answer that we consider right is actually the right answer. So we're not scoring the LLM on something that's incorrect. And then this feedback from human experts is incorporated into the final prompts. And this is something that really makes our benchmark in particular unique. A lot of AI benchmarks use things like Amazon Mechanical Turk or just another LLM to review the prompts for their benchmark, which again kind of threatens construct validity of these benchmarks. So I've included some results from our annotation. So first, some scores on 2 different scenarios in our benchmark. So you can see across the annotators, we have for all of our scenarios and sub-scenarios over a score above 4 out of 5. So they're rating the realisticness of the scenarios and sub-scenarios on a scale from 1 to 5. We average over 4 for all of our scenarios that we looked at. So we consider this a strong signal that our scenarios are realistic. We consider average scores above 4 to be good enough for the realism of the scenarios. There was some small suggestion on wording changes that we could make, but overall, the annotators were very happy with the individual scenarios and sub-scenarios. And then here's a bit of summary on feedback for our actual question and answers from our annotators. So something, and kind of how we incorporated this feedback into the final version of the benchmark questions. So first, we received several points of feedback that I questioned. So those questions asking what failure mode or obligation violation is present could in some cases have multiple answers where, at the high level, it's this kind of obligation, but there's also a component of a different kind of obligation being violated. So we changed the question wording for our I questions to be which failure mode is most present, or which obligation violation is most present. Then there was a lot of discussion of what level of laws to include and how to present them for the rule identification and rule application question. So we decided to include only real international human rights laws. So we had played around with maybe suggesting fictional laws that are unique to the particular country. We decided that introduced too much complexity and noise to the evaluation. So we're only looking at real laws, and then we're also only looking at international human rights laws. So there were some questions in our initial scenario where we had, in our initial benchmark prompts where we had included things like region or country specific laws, and we decided to just focus on international human rights law for this first version. And then something else we did was we need to ensure that all of the laws are presented the same way. So for every sub scenario, we're presenting the answer choices in the same way. So we include the full name of the law and the specific article that we're referencing for all of the answers. The feedback for but overall, our I and R questions, the annotators were very happy with our questions and answers. There was more feedback on the A and P questions. So in particular, there was some disagreement on ordering for the A questions. The annotators did not all agree. So one thing we implemented is that binding laws will always be ranked above non-binding, like human rights policy or things drawn from non-binding international human rights documents. And then the other thing is that we got a lot of feedback where people were like, oh, between this, we maybe give 8 possible laws that we want to order, and they generally agreed with what we consider to be the correct ordering. But they're like, well, these 2 laws are almost equivalent, so I could go either way on which one comes first. So to address that, going back to the importance of evaluation metrics, we are implementing an evaluation metric, a scoring metric for those A questions that allows some uncertainty for pairwise rankings. So the model is not penalized for switching the order of 2 laws that are next to each other in the list. And then for the P questions, generally all the annotators agreed with what we had suggested as proposed remedies, but they also had many additional suggestions that we didn't include in our initial list of remedies. So of course, we're incorporating all of those suggestions, but also we're looking at reworking our development pipeline to try to generate better coverage from the get-go. Okay, so now I'm really excited to share the first preliminary results from our right to water benchmark. So we've looked at 3 models so far, GPT, Claude, and Gemini. So I'll show each of the model results individually first. So first up, we looked at GPT 4.1. We ran all of the right to water prompts 5 times individually. We eventually will scale this to even more. So it's important to run the same question multiple times because AI models are stochastic and not deterministic. So it might say A is the correct answer one time, but it might say B is the correct answer the next time. So in order to make sure you're really capturing the real behavior of the model, you want to look at multiple runs of the same question. So we've done 5 runs so far, and OpenAI and we so far are just sharing the results for the I and R questions, so those multiple choice questions, because they are straightforward to score. We got the best annotation results for those questions, and we're still finalizing our metrics for evaluating the A and P questions. So we're not quite ready to share those yet. But across the I and R questions, the GPT-4 got an overall average score across all runs and questions of 50.67%. So kind of not good, not bad, right? It's good for us because we don't want to get 100% out of the box. That means that our benchmark is not nuanced enough, but we're not going to see differences between different LLMs. But, of course, as human rights promoters, we would hope that eventually the models will get better than 50%. So these are fairly straightforward multiple choice questions. So it really shows that the models don't have much internalized representation of human rights law. And then we break down the performance across the different question types, and you'll see this as a trend across all the models that they do worst on the obligation question. So is it a failure of the obligation to respect, protect, or fulfill? And then GPT-4 does best at the rule recall question, so identifying which law applies to a particular scenario, but still only 60% accuracy. Next, we looked at Google. So we looked at Gemini 2.5 Flash. Unfortunately, we ran out of credits on the 5th run. So this one is an average across 4 runs. But you can see there's a lot more fluctuation in the performance, a lot more stochasticity in the performance of Gemini. So the minimum score was only 33%. Only a third of the questions were answered correctly. The average score averages out to be around 50%. And again, it does much worse on the obligation identification questions than the other 2 types. And then the third model we've looked at so far is Claude. In particular, we looked at Claude Sonnet 4. Claude seems to have more stable performance. All of the runs hover right around 50%. Again, it does slightly worse on the obligation identification questions, but overall pretty similar and stable performance, which is really interesting to see. So to kind of synthesize these results, all of the models hover around 50 to 60% overall accuracy, which, like I mentioned briefly already, means that our benchmark is probing something important. You don't want your benchmark to, you don't want models to get 100% score on your benchmark out of the box. That means that your benchmark isn't nuanced enough to actually measure something. Additionally, all models demonstrate stochastic performance behavior across runs, which is also a useful signal for us from the AI research side, because that means that our benchmark is probing sort of a real knowledge base in the model, rather than something that it's seen on the internet a bunch and memorized answers for. So that means basically that these kind of questions that we've written aren't already present on the internet, which is great because we did use moot cases as some inspiration for our scenarios and things. But that means that, because we're seeing this variability in model performance, that the model is essentially trying to answer the question and not just relying on memorized information. Something that I found really interesting in these initial results is that all the models do the worst job on detecting what type of obligation is violated. And I thought this was really interesting because these obligations are kind of the core of human rights law, and they're an explicit legal concept, whereas the failure modes is not actually like written in law. So it's really interesting that the models don't do as well on detecting these obligation violations. Um, and then something else interesting is that all of the models kind of exhibit different patterns. So GPT has a lot of variability across all of the question types. Gemini does the best on average, but by far the worst on those obligation violation questions. Like it was in the 40s for those obligation violations. And then Claude is, like I said already briefly, the most stable and consistent across different question types. And then we did additional analyses across looking at like, oh, do models do better on, a particular scenarios about a particular kind of group or a particular actor, a particular type of obligation. And at least in our initial analysis, we didn't see any obvious patterns across the taxonomy components. And then lastly, I wanted to just share one of our biggest ongoing challenges right now, which is scoring those P questions. So we're trying to balance ease of scoring these questions with truthful assessment. So we don't want to rely on something like Mechanical Turk or using another LLM to score the outputs of a different LLM. But expert annotation doesn't allow others to use the benchmark. So we can use annotators and feedback from experts in developing the questions and answers. But if we use humans to score those proposed remedies, then anyone else who wants to use the benchmark on a model that we haven't looked at or a new version of their model isn't going to be able to use the benchmark without recruiting their own set of experts, which is going to really hurt adoption. So we're looking at a bunch of different methods to score these questions. I think we've settled on a pretty good approach, but we're not able to share those results yet. But just to show why this is important, and this is an example of what we can, like our list of proposed remedies that we generated for that first sub scenario, again, of women and children having to walk long distances to access water on the left. And then on the right is, it was actually longer, but the first 6 of the remedies that I believe this is from GPT-4 generated. And when we used just semantic similarity scoring, which is kind of a common approach in natural language processing research that gives you a similarity score between 2 pieces of text, it was not nuanced enough at all. So you can see that the answers are different, what the LLM proposed versus what we propose. There's no like mention of women in particular, yet the semantic similarity scoring methods that are traditionally used gave this a really high score anyway. So there's not a lot of nuance in how that's done. Basically, because they talk about the same subjects and they use some of the same words, automated processes score this as being really similar. So we've had to come up with a more complex scoring metric here, which I hope to share publicly soon. And then finally, just to share a bit about where we're at in this process. So we are finishing up incorporating all of our annotations into our final right to water data set, and then that will be published. We also are working on our second right now of due process. So we should have results for right to due process soon as well. And then we hope to scale up from there. We're talking to a lot of potential collaborators because obviously there are a lot of human rights laws beyond just right to water and due process. But as you can maybe glean from these slides, this is a fairly time-intensive process to generate these scenarios and prompts. So we are looking to expand now that we have kind of validated our methodology. And so there are definitely opportunities for folks to get involved with this project if you are interested. And you don't need necessarily technical experience to get involved in the project. We definitely need people with human rights experience as well. And then I just want to give a huge thank you to my collaborators, Matt and Abby, on this project. Abby, in particular, was really working down to the wire on getting these initial results out. So really appreciate them, and you all for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So thank you so much.